Have you ever felt that inner tugging, that silent yet constant tension, as if something inside you is pulling in several directions at once? There is what you feel deeply, sometimes with strength and intensity. There is what you want to do almost instinctively. And then there is that small inner voice, quieter but persistent, reminding you of what you know is right before God. This conflict isn't always visible. It doesn't necessarily express itself in words, but it wears you down inside. It tires your faith, troubles your peace, and creates a form of spiritual confusion that many believers carry without ever managing to explain it clearly. You can sincerely love God, pray regularly, read the Bible, listen to teachings, serve faithfully, and still live an unstable faith, sometimes heavy, sometimes discouraging. One day you feel close to God, strong, confident, carried by an inner joy, and the next day you find yourself dry, troubled, overwhelmed by contradictory thoughts or emotions you don't understand. This back and forth isn't necessarily a sign of a lack of love for God or even a lack of faith. Very often, it reveals instead a deep lack of understanding of what is happening inside you, where the invisible decisions that truly shape your entire spiritual life are made. The essential question then is not just, do I believe in God, but rather, who really governs my inner life? Is it my emotions, sometimes changing and unpredictable? Is it my past wounds, my fears, my habits? Is it my bodily desires or my human reasoning? Or is it truly God's Spirit guiding my choices, my reactions, and my deepest directions? As long as this question isn't asked honestly, the Christian life can become a constant effort, a permanent inner struggle, instead of an illuminated and peaceful path. Yet the Bible reveals an essential truth that many neglect. The human being is not a single dimension. We are not just a body that acts, nor only a soul that feels, nor even a spirit that believes. We are composed of a body, a soul, and a spirit. 3 distinct dimensions, created by God with a precise order, role, and function. When these dimensions are confused, reversed, or misunderstood, spiritual life becomes unclear. We pray without truly hearing. We move forward without clarity. We obey sometimes, but with a constant inner fatigue, as if something inside is always resisting. Understanding this distinction is not merely an intellectual or theological exercise reserved for a few initiates. It is a profound key, capable of transforming the way you pray, the way you discern God's will, your ability to resist temptations and listen to God's voice with greater clarity. It is a light that illuminates the inside, where the real spiritual battle is fought. If what you are hearing now already resonates within you, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, because each video is designed to nourish your spirit and help you walk with greater stability and peace. Also, take a moment to write in the comments a simple but sincere phrase, such as, "Lord, enlighten my inner being." This is not just a word left by chance. It is a spiritual declaration, a conscious choice to open your heart to the truth. If you know someone who is living this inner battle without being able to put it into words, share this video with them. Sometimes, a single light is enough to dispel years of silent confusion. And above all, stay until the end, because a surprise awaits you. A special moment prepared for those who choose to go all the way, without distraction, without consuming this message hastily, but by receiving it fully. Now, take a moment to slow down, breathe deeply, let your body settle, let your thoughts calm down, and accept that this moment is not a space entrusted by God to accomplish a mission on earth. However, the problem is not the existence of the body, but the place we give it in the internal governance of life. The danger begins when the body ceases to be an instrument and becomes a ruler, when its needs, sensations, and desires take precedence over spiritual direction. The body constantly speaks. It expresses itself through fatigue, hunger, desire, the pursuit of pleasure, comfort, or the avoidance of suffering. This voice can be insistent, pressing, sometimes even persuasive. It demands rest when effort is required. It seeks ease when obedience demands a sacrifice. It wants to satisfy the present moment without always considering the spiritual consequences. The problem is not that the body has a voice, but that this voice is often mistaken for legitimate guidance. Many decisions are made not because they are right before God, but because they relieve the body, avoid discomfort, or feed an immediate pleasure. Thus, the body ends up shaping choices, influencing priorities, and setting the pace of life. Learning to walk with Christ involves a clear understanding of this reality. The body must serve, but it must never command. When it governs, it gradually weakens the soul and stifles spiritual sensitivity. A life dominated by the body becomes centered on the visible, the immediate, on instant gratification. Prayer becomes difficult, not because God is absent, but because the body demands something else. Spiritual discipline is perceived as a burden, not as nourishment, because the body prefers what is comfortable over what is transformative. Yet when the body is submitted to God, when it accepts to place itself in the service of a higher purpose, it becomes an instrument of peace, a means through which faith manifests concretely. Gestures, choices, daily habits then become a visible expression of an aligned inner reality. The submission of the body is not a punishment nor a rejection of the material, but a restoration of order. It involves recognizing that the body is not the center, but the support. When it is disciplined, respected, and oriented toward God, it ceases to be a silent tyrant and becomes an ally. It accompanies prayer, supports obedience, and reflects externally what is lived internally. But when it takes control, it tires the soul with excesses, imbalances, and constant compromises, and it weakens the spirit by preventing it from expressing itself freely. Understanding this place of the body is an essential step to move out of a faith based on reaction and enter into a walk founded on inner alignment. 2. The soul, the inner world. The soul is the inner world, invisible yet intensely alive, where thoughts, memories, desires, wounds, will, and emotions intersect. It is the space where you interpret what you experience, where you feel deeply what happens to you, where you decide how to react to events. The soul is often the place of the most intense battles, because it is constantly solicited by what comes from the body and influenced by what touches the spirit. It can move in a very short time from deep joy to heavy discouragement, from burning faith to silent, paralyzing doubt. This instability is not necessarily a sign of bad faith, but a natural characteristic of the soul when it is not firmly anchored. The soul can sincerely love God. It can be touched by prayer, moved by praise, deeply sensitive to spiritual things, but it remains changeable, impressionable, marked by personal history, past wounds, and present emotions. It is in the soul that reasoning is formed. Fears take root. painful memories resurface, and expectations are born. When the soul is not aligned with the spirit, it can resist God's calls when they involve a sacrifice, a difficult forgiveness, a costly obedience. It can rationalize, justify, delay, until it gradually stifles the spiritual impulse. But when the soul is restored by truth, when it learns to rely not on its fluctuations but on a deeper inner direction, it becomes a space of peace, a place where emotions gradually align with God's will. It ceases to be a permanent battlefield and becomes ground prepared for a stable, rooted spiritual life. 3. The Spirit, the place of encounter with God. The Spirit is the deepest part of your being, the part that does not express itself through noise, agitation, or immediate emotion, but through a stable and quiet inner presence. It is within this invisible dimension that God truly speaks, not through urgent impulses or intense sensations, but through an intimate, calm, and precise communication. Authentic faith does not take root in the passing enthusiasm of the soul or in the reactions of the body, but in this inner space where the human spirit resonates with the Spirit of God. Because God is Spirit, true communion can only happen at this level. Everything else may imitate spirituality, but only the Spirit can truly carry it. Unlike the soul, the Spirit does not shout and never seeks to impose its voice through urgency. It does not push. It does not rush. It does not create inner pressure. Its way of speaking is subtle, almost imperceptible to those who have not learned to listen. This is precisely why so many believers miss God's direction. They expect a strong emotion, a spectacular sign, an obvious sensation, while God often reveals himself in inner silence. When emotional noise fades and the soul stops speaking, an awakened spirit does not need visible manifestations to recognize God's voice. It does not rely on agitation or constant external confirmation. It discerns inwardly with peaceful clarity what comes from God and what does not. This recognition is not based on reasoning, but on inner familiarity, a growing communion that develops over time. The more the spirit is nourished, the more sensitive it becomes. The more it is neglected, the quieter it becomes. Not because God stops speaking, but because the inner ear is no longer trained to hear. 4. The divine order. From the inside outward, God always acts according to a precise order, and this order is never random. He begins on the inside and gradually manifests outwardly. First the spirit, then the soul, and finally the body. This divine order is not merely theological structure. It is a spiritual law of functioning. When the spirit is strong, nourished, and awakened, it naturally influences the soul, which becomes calmer, more stable, and progressively aligned. And when the soul is at peace, the body finds its rightful place, obeying without excessive resistance and becoming an instrument serving what has already been decided inwardly. But when this order is reversed, imbalance appears. If the spirit is neglected, the soul takes control. It begins to govern according to emotions, fears, wounds, and desires. The body, in turn, follows these impulses without discernment, seeking comfort, avoiding effort, reacting instead of obeying. But it is decisive. It is the moment when communion with God becomes possible again, when the deepest part of a person is reconnected to its source. From this awakening begins a process, not an instant perfection. First, the spirit grows stronger. As it is nourished by the Word, by prayer, and by communion with God, it gains clarity, sensitivity, and authority. Then, progressively, the soul begins to change. Thoughts are renewed, emotions are reoriented, wounds are exposed and healed, and the will starts to align with a higher direction. Finally, the body follows. Behaviors adjust, habits change, and actions begin to reflect an inner transformation rather than forced self-control. This order is essential. When it is respected, transformation is sustainable. When it is ignored, the Christian life becomes exhausting. Many believers become discouraged because they try to reverse this process. They attempt to change their emotions, control their reactions, or discipline their behavior without first nourishing their spirit. They fight against anger, fear, addiction, or inconsistency using willpower alone, and when they fail, they conclude that something is wrong with their faith. But the problem is not a lack of sincerity, it is a lack of spiritual nourishment. A weak spirit cannot sustain victory, no matter how strong the intentions of the soul may be. True victory does not come from emotional effort or moral striving. It flows naturally from a living, strengthened spirit. A living spirit carries life, clarity, and direction. It does not eliminate struggle instantly, but it provides the inner authority needed to face it. When the spirit is alive, obedience becomes possible without violence. Discipline becomes natural rather than forced, and change becomes progressive instead of frustrating. This is why Scripture emphasizes being born again rather than trying harder. Christianity is not a self-improvement system, it is a resurrection reality. When the Spirit lives, transformation follows its course. When the Spirit is neglected, even the most sincere efforts collapse under pressure. Understanding this truth changes the way one walks with God, shifting the focus from outward performance to inward vitality. 6. Learning to listen to God. The voice of God is not found in confusion, pressure, or inner agitation. It does not compete with anxiety, nor does it force decisions through urgency or fear. God's voice is gentle, clear, and peaceful, not because it lacks authority, but because it comes from a place of divine stability. Many believers struggle to hear God not because He is silent, but because they are listening in the wrong places. They expect His guidance to arrive with emotional intensity, immediate certainty, or dramatic signs, while His voice often emerges in stillness, clarity, and quiet conviction. To hear God, one must often slow down, not only physically, but internally. The pace of modern life, constant stimulation, and mental noise make it difficult for the spirit to remain sensitive. When thoughts race, emotions dominate, and distractions multiply, the inner ear becomes dull. Listening to God requires learning to create space, to pause, and to accept silence without fear. Silence is not emptiness. It is a condition for perception. In moments of stillness, when the soul stops reacting and the body stops demanding, the spirit becomes attentive. Learning to listen to God also means learning to listen more than speaking. Many prayers are filled with words, requests, explanations, and emotional expression, but little space is left for reception. Yet God's guidance is often received, not produced. It emerges as a quiet certainty, a restrained conviction. This does not eliminate the need for wisdom or counsel, but it anchors the heart in a deeper source. The more one practices stillness, the more familiar God's voice becomes. And the more familiar it becomes, the less confusion dominates the inner life. Listening to God is not about mastering a technique. It is about cultivating a posture, one of availability, reverence, and quiet attentiveness. It is in this posture that the Spirit learns to hear clearly and walk confidently. 7. Spiritual maturity. Spiritual maturity is not measured by what you feel, but by what guides you when feelings are absent, unclear, or even contradictory. Many confuse maturity with intensity, assuming that a strong emotional response, a powerful experience, or a visible spiritual reaction is evidence of growth. Yet emotions fluctuate, circumstances change, and sensations fade. Maturity reveals itself not in moments of spiritual excitement, but in consistency when nothing seems to move. A mature believer is not the one who feels God the most, but the one who remains aligned with God even when feelings offer no support. What defines maturity is not emotional elevation, but inner direction. A spiritually mature person learns to obey even when obedience brings no immediate satisfaction. They move forward even when understanding is partial or absent. They trust even when there is no visible sign confirming the path ahead. This kind of faith is quiet, unremarkable to the outside world, yet profoundly powerful. It does not depend on motivation or reassurance. It is rooted in conviction. Such a believer does not live according to reactions, impulses, or emotional reflexes, but according to the steady inner voice of the Spirit. This voice does not always explain itself, but it consistently leads toward truth, alignment, and life. Spiritual immaturity reacts. Spiritual maturity responds. Immaturity asks, "How do I feel about this?" Maturity asks, "What is the Spirit leading me to do?" This distinction changes everything. When reactions govern life, decisions are unstable and progress is inconsistent. But when the Spirit governs, choices are anchored, even when costly. Maturity does not eliminate struggle, but it removes confusion about direction. A mature believer may still feel fear, hesitation, or weakness, but these no longer dictate action. The inner compass has shifted. The Spirit has become the reference point. This is why spiritual maturity is often forged in silence, delay, and uncertainty. When emotions offer no clarity and circumstances provide no confirmation, the believer is forced to lean inward, not toward the soul, but toward the Spirit. Over time, this reliance builds spiritual strength. Obedience becomes less dramatic but more consistent. Faith becomes less expressive but more stable. The believer no longer needs to be constantly reassured, stimulated, or emotionally lifted. There is an inner knowing that sustains movement even in darkness. Mature faith also accepts that growth is not always visible. It understands that God often works beneath the surface, shaping character, refining perception, and strengthening trust long before any outward result appears. This kind of faith is patient. It waits without resentment. It continues without applause. It obeys without guarantees. And in doing so, it becomes deeply rooted. When storms come, it does not collapse because it was never built on emotional weather, but on spiritual foundation. Walking in peace. When the Spirit governs, peace naturally settles into the inner life, not a fragile peace dependent on faith. It reveals a source that is not human, a strength that is not circumstantial. It points quietly but clearly to God. Walking in peace does not mean disengaging from life. It means engaging from a place of spiritual rest rather than emotional strain. Decisions are made without haste. Words are chosen without defensiveness. Actions flow from conviction rather than pressure. Life becomes less reactive and more intentional. This peace does not eliminate responsibility. It supports it. It does not remove effort. It purifies motivation. As the Spirit continues to govern, peace deepens. It becomes less something you seek and more something you carry. Even in moments of uncertainty, there is trust. Even in waiting, there is assurance. Even in weakness, there is stability. This peace is not learned intellectually. It is grown through alignment. It is the fruit of a life ordered from the inside out. Final prayer. Lord, I place my body, my soul, and my spirit before you. Awaken my spirit to your presence and your truth. Calm my soul where it is restless, wounded, or afraid. Sanctify my body, that it may serve your purposes faithfully. Teach me to walk not by emotion, not by sight, not by pressure, but by the quiet guidance of your Spirit. Order my inner life according to your will, and let every part of my being reflect your light. May my life be rooted in peace, guided by truth, and shaped by your presence, day after day. Amen.